Coming to you from the Hudson Media Group studio, this is Talking Politics, and I am the professor, Fernando Uribe. I hope you had a very safe quarantine with you and your families. Again, during this past summer months, it's been quite a challenge in 2020 for all of us, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm glad you're joining us right here once again with Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Here's what I'm thinking about right now. Now, during this quarantine, ladies and gentlemen, I had the opportunity to sort of reflect, refresh my batteries, and sort of recharge my energies into my media projects. And of course, as you saw during the summer months under quarantine, certainly Talking Politics did its best to come at you every week with thought-provoking topics and stimulating content throughout this pandemic. But now we're back in the studio, and certainly it got me thinking about what I'm sort of looking at when it comes to how I perceive liberals in today's political climate. So I took the opportunity this summer to write a letter to all my liberal viewers and all my liberal friends on social media who seem to be having tantrums whenever and wherever possible. So I wrote this letter and I wanted to read it to you on the air and at least get a sense of what I'm thinking about as it is September, and we know we are less than 50 days away from perhaps the most consequential election in our lifetime. Now, let me just preface this by saying that, I am over the age of 40, so I've seen a good handful of presidential elections, from maybe like the late terms of Ronald Reagan to the one and only term of George H.W. Bush to the 8 years of Bill Clinton, and then the 8 years of George W. Bush, and of course, the 8 years of Barack Obama. And through it all those elections had different topics and different sort of controversies that encompassed them. But now more than ever, coming up on November 3rd, I would argue this election is a very simple one. I'll detail why that is coming up on election night. But getting back to my letter that I wrote this summer to liberals, and I want to make sure that you get the context of it because it's that important. So again, as I said, I wanted to write this letter over the pandemic to all the liberals in the area. Now, if you're a liberal who cannot stand President Trump and cannot possibly fathom why conservatives like me and so many others in New Jersey would ever vote for him once again, well, let me finally fill you in. It's not that we love Donald Trump so much. We get it. He can be difficult to sort of put up with. He's bombastic. He's hyperbolic. Oftentimes, he's not presidential. Okay? But it's not so much that we don't love Donald Trump. It's that we can't stand you. And we're going to do whatever it takes, even if that means electing a rude, obnoxious, unpredictable narcissist. By the way, those are your words, liberals, not mine, to the office, once again, of the presidency of the United States. Because the only thing we find more dangerous to the nation than Donald Trump is many of you liberals. Now, how is that possible, you may ask? Well, you've done everything in your power to destroy our country. Let me put this in context for you. From tearing down the police, to tearing down our history, to tearing down our borders, from systematically destroying our schools and brainwashing our kids into believing that somehow socialism is the answer to everything, despite the fact that socialism has been an unmitigated failure anywhere that it's been tried on the planet and throughout human history. While you've also demonized religion and faith, you've been glorifying abortion, violence in our cities, and even thug culture. Many of you liberals have started calling us racist every time that we expect every one of us, especially of my skin tone, whether I'm someone who's brown like me or someone who's black, to follow laws equally, to tell us that, quote, tolerance of lifestyles that we don't agree with isn't nearly enough, that we have to, quote, celebrate any lifestyle or gender option. Because somehow for many liberals, you lecture us about, oh, well, Fernando, I hear it all the time in my social media. Oh, well, you know what? You're a climate denier. When you use words like climate hysteria, we can tell you're a climate denier. I'm not a climate denier. I understand that we have to preserve the planet and take care of the environment. But this climate hysteria that we have been seeing for decades now is something I have to call out. So when liberals talk about science, they say, well, Fernando, you don't believe in science. Well, guess what? To all the liberals out there that think that there are 35 genders, here's a newsflash. At some point in time, I'm assuming you took high school biology, right? Well, I did. And while the natural sciences were not my best subject in high school, what I did really well in? Biology. And I actually was one of the few natural science courses I actually got an A in. And you know what I learned in biology, whether it was high school or whether I took it during my undergraduate years at Rutgers University? I learned that there are two genders. That's right, folks, spoiler alert, two genders. There aren't 35. It's not about being cisgendered or non-binary. That's nonsense. Okay, so when you lecture us about, oh, well, Fernando, you don't believe in science. Well, guess what? You don't believe in science either if you're going to lecture me about biology. But let me not digress, as I want to continue reading my letter to you. And of course, you want to call us homophobic or racist or bigots or xenophobic or transphobe or homophobes because we just may not subscribe to some lifestyles that we might not find appropriate or, quite frankly, may not find very logical. But that's the thing I want to call out here. And that's one of the things I want to talk about, again, with the fact that liberals have to be called out. Or perhaps it's the fact that, unilaterally you think that over 240 years here in this country for Americans of the right to bear arms against, let's say, what could be a tyrannical or ineffective government should be abolished. Because you can't get the violence in your cities that you manage under control. And that's the thing, folks. This is what drives me crazy. Because I talk about it not only on this program, but other programs as well, which include my podcast, Talking to Hudson, and Politically Direct via Insider NJ, or Real Talk via Eyes on NJ. And I discuss it quite openly. Yes, where I live in Hudson County, it's a very blue area. As a matter of fact, where I live in Union City, I have a blue mayor, okay? I have a blue form of government. I have a democratically controlled form of government. But you know what the difference is? And this is where I'm going to sort of really break it down for you. Where I live in Union City, my mayor is Brian Stack. He's also my state senator in the New Jersey State Legislature. But you know what Mayor Stack cares about? He cares about funding the police. He cares about respecting the hardworking men and women in blue that take care of my fellow Union City residents. He cares about the quality of life. He cares about preserving our taxes at a reasonable rate. Yeah, it's a little expensive to live in Union City, but it is anywhere in Hudson County. But Mayor Stack cares about keeping the city clean, keeping it orderly, and most importantly, keeping it in a way that's pacified. Okay? So when people say, well, Fernando, you're always trashing blue mayors and blue cities. Okay, that's true. But the perspective I'm coming at you from is when I'm looking at where I live, yes, it's a Democrat mayor. But folks, it's a small municipality. But let's think about the cities in this country. Never mind, you know what? We'll get to the country in a minute. Let's talk about the cities in New Jersey. Think about Paterson, almost half of Jersey City, Newark, Elizabeth, Trenton. Kim, you know what they all have in common? They've been run by Democratic mayors and Democratic city councils for 30 plus years. You know what they all have in common? Folks, they're dumps. Okay, they're outright dumps. I could use another word, but this is a family-friendly program. Okay, but they're outright disasters. Okay, so when people say, well, Fernando, you're sort of talking out of both sides of your mouth. No, I'm not, because I've clearly illustrated that when it comes to, let's say, a Democratic mayor in a municipality, guess what? Mayor Stack does an incredible job, perhaps the best job of any mayor in the state of New Jersey, to preserve everything I just mentioned. And of course, other mayors in Hudson County do as well. Mayor Nick Sacco, Mayor Gilbert Rodriguez in West New York, Mayor Wayne Zitt in Guttenberg, certainly Mayor Michael Gannelli in Secaucus. You know what? Even, let's say, Mayor Richard Turner as well in the city, in the township of Weehawken. Okay, so I don't want to sort of paint with a broad brush when it comes to Democratic mayors, because as we all know here in Hudson County, I just gave you a concrete and bulletproof list of items that verifies that, that they're responsible. But look at the mayors and city councils in the cities I just mentioned here in New Jersey. They're disasters. Liberal policies have doomed these cities into bankruptcy. So I don't want to hear liberals complain about, it's Republicans' fault or conservatives. Conservatives and Republicans haven't ruled big cities in New Jersey in almost half a century. So how is it our fault? It's liberal policies. It's coddling illegals. It's spending and taxing away like your drunken sailors. Nothing against sailors. They're great men and women serving in our armed forces. But you're doing a disservice to sailors when you're spending that recklessly. Or you don't care about the preservation of the quality of life in your cities. Or the fact that you're not respecting the men and women in blue in those police departments. That's what I'm getting at right here in terms of what this election means this November. Okay? It's the idea that liberals, not just here in New Jersey, but liberals across the country. Folks, let's look at the cities that are unmitigated disasters here. Let's look at Philadelphia. Let's look at Cleveland, St. Louis, Baltimore, Milwaukee, okay? Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, Oakland, San Francisco. Folks, these are unmitigated failures. You know what they all have in common? 30 plus years of Democratic mayors, Democratic city councils, and in most instances, Democratic governors who will bitch and moan to the moon that somehow the disasters that are their cities and the mess that they've created or the disorder that exists is somehow the fault of the President of the United States. Here's a newsflash for you. In 2014 and 2015, when you saw civil unrest in Baltimore, in Ferguson, in perhaps Milwaukee, did anybody ever say, this is Obama's America? Of course not. Why? The liberal media wanted to coddle their baby boy as much as possible. But somehow in 2020, every disaster going on in our cities is somehow President Trump's fault. Folks, we know that's nonsense, and we all know it's bull blank, okay? I'm here to tell you that's the truth. And coming up this November 3rd, the choice is very simple. Do you want a guy who is not very coherent right now, who you can tell is cognitively disintegrating before our very eyes, and represents a party that is governing the cities I just mentioned? Is that the disorder and chaos you want? Or do you want to reelect a man that, I get it, he's not presidential. He's not perfect. He's very flawed. He's bombastic. He's hyperbolic. He's oftentimes very rude and obnoxious. I get all that. But he's gotten things done. He's gotten more things done in 47 months as president than Joe Biden has in 47 years in government. You don't believe me? Go on YouTube. Go on Google. Go on Instagram. Go on Facebook. Wherever it is you need to go get your facts. But I promise you, once you do, you know that I'm right. And coming up on November 3rd, the choice is very clear. It's either law and order and stability, even before COVID, folks, because we get it. COVID destroyed a lot of what we know today. But do you want the alternative? The alternative seems crazy. It seems illogical. And quite frankly, it seems tyrannical as well. Hey, the choice is simple on November 3rd. I'll leave it up to you. And that's what I'm thinking about right now. Now to some local stories for your consideration. Let's go to Jersey City. And a nice job by John Hines with the Hudson County View for his report on this story. Now, apparently the Journal Square Community Association hosted a recent debate online about the future of the Christopher Columbus statue right there in Journal Square near the path entrance. Now, the Journal Square Community Association hosted a virtual debate last week over whether or not Christopher Columbus, specifically the statue in the plaza, should be removed. Now, according to James Deaver, who moderated the forum, he said the following, quote, "History is subjective. It is often compromised of composite narratives. It is often fashioned by those with the most power." Also, Jay Yee, a resident of Journal Square, argued that the statue has overstayed its welcome. He said it made sense to take down a statue that, quote, "no longer represents our values." Yee noted that in 1776, after reading the Declaration of Independence, a statue of King George III in New York City was eventually taken down. Quote, "It would be akin to a colonist in 1776 saying we need to keep the statue of King George." Now, Christopher Columbus's crimes were vile even in his time, exclaiming that the often renowned Italian explorer was responsible for murders, rapes, and sadistic torture. He also went on to say that there are countless other Italian Americans with far better track records who deserve to be acknowledged. He even mentioned 1984 Democratic presidential nominee Geraldine Ferraro and even Dr. Anthony Fauci as possible alternatives. Now, Angelo Estrada expressed a different point of view during that meeting, explaining that since he is half Italian and half Puerto Rican, he has been conflicted on this issue for some time. Quote, "It's very sad. I honor him for discovering America. I don't really honor him for the atrocious things that have been done." Meanwhile, Dante Alighieri Society for Italian Americans president Albert Cupo argued against removing the statue. Mr. Cupo said, quote, "The statue itself represents a source of pride, not only for Italian people, but for people who have come through Jersey City." Now, as well, during that meeting, now, here's some facts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the statue was unveiled in 1950. Now, Mr. Cupo said it was previously across from the Lowe's Theater in Journal Square, but then moved to its present location in front of the path entrance in Journal Square in the early 1980s. Now, the statue represents everybody, according to Mr. Cupo. He added that Jersey City has an annual Columbus Day parade where his organization places a wreath on the statue of Christopher Columbus. Without him, we wouldn't be here probably. Now, Mr. Cupo also went on to say, and he pointed out, that due to the construction of one Journal Square Plaza, the statue will likely need to be moved anyway. Others, though, were not as forgiving when looking at Columbus's track record as a whole. For example, quote, "The Taino people in the Dominican Republic were essentially exterminated. In DR, Columbus is seen more like a binger of genocide and a conquistador. I personally believe that a replacement statue should honor indigenous people," according to Carlos Fernandez, also a member of the Community Association. Quote, "The Italians need a hero to connect with the American people and picked Columbus. There's plenty of great Italian people that we can honor that are not as divisive. For example, let's just put up a statue of Frank Sinatra." Well, folks, let me say this, and I've talked about this really on my other media platforms. And I understand that people want to have tantrums that get triggered by statues. And apparently, in recent years, Christopher Columbus seems to be the easy target. Folks, I teach history for a living. Okay, so maybe I need to, have a history class with you right now in a very abbreviated form. Okay, no one here is trying to rationalize or find the actions of Christopher Columbus acceptable. But folks, you know what? Here's a spoiler alert. Since the beginning of time, humanity's been massacring each other, okay? Do you think thousands of years ago that the Vikings in Northern Europe sat around a table and said, you know what, those group of Vikings down the road, well, you know what, after we finish dinner, let's go sit down with them and try to talk about how to appropriate land in the nearby vicinity? Of course not. They were slaughtering each other, for God's sake, okay? Do you think Native Americans here in this country, long before Columbus arrived, do you think they sat around a table around a bonfire after they ate, let's say after they fed their children or put them to sleep? You think they sat around saying, you know what, that tribe that's miles away, you know what, we need to sit down with them and talk about, hey, you know what, there's land we have to discuss and maybe there's land in dispute. You know what they were doing? They were killing each other, okay? I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's correct, but it's happened. Folks, mass murder, genocide, that's been part of human history, okay? We need to stop being so triggered with what statues do to us, okay? I understand that Columbus did what he did, but you know what? So did many others, okay? Do you think that African slave traders along the continent of Africa just, didn't massacre nearby tribes along, in the continent of Africa? Of course they did. You think they sat around writing out notes to each other saying, well, you know what, maybe I should appropriate this or you should appropriate that. No, they were killing each other. Folks, that's happened since the beginning of human history. What don't you get about that? I'm not saying it's correct. I'm not trying to rationalize and say, oh my God, we should applaud it. Of course not, but it happened. We should stop being triggered about some things that are out of our control, for God's sake. All right? And the idea that Christopher Columbus somehow triggers people, folks, he died like sometime in whatever it was, like the 1500s or something. Okay? And like 500 years later, you're still getting triggered by Christopher Columbus. Jesus Christ, do me a favor, folks. Dedicate your energy to something more productive. Okay? Christopher Columbus and other historical statues, hey, fine. You don't agree with it? Okay, but do me a favor. Don't take that opportunity away from people to be able to relive that history and just have it there. Okay? Getting triggered by statues. Jesus Christ, folks, you need to grow up here. Okay? This has happened since the beginning of time, since humans were first walking the earth. Okay? They were slaughtering each other. Okay? That's just human history. That's humanity, folks. Okay? Do you think Columbus was different? Of course not. He wasn't the first, and he certainly wasn't the last. All right, so again, if you think a statue of Columbus should be taken down, then you know what? Anything else that's cultural, whether it be Vikings, whether it be Native Americans, you know what? That triggers me. Because you know what? If there's any community that wants to glorify Native Americans, well, guess what? They slaughtered each other too. But you know what? You know why I don't say those things? Because I'm rational. I'm logical. I'm not going to sort of, subjugate myself to this sort of like woke nonsense that seems to be permeating, among the left in this country. I just finished telling you during my opening monologue, that's how destructive and toxic liberals are. Okay, because this is what they fixate on. They fixate on political correctness. They fixate on, social justice nonsense. They fixate on like social engineering and climate hysteria, okay, and multicultural gibberish. This is what they focus on. And folks, I don't know about you, regular working class people like me, we're sick of it. We're tired of it. We just want to go to work. We want to earn. We want to provide for our families. We want to at the end of the day, just live our lives. The last thing we want to do is be freaking subjected to all this woke nonsense that the left is somehow keeping a patent on. And you know what? To the Journal Square Community Association, good for you for having a Zoom meeting. But you know what? There are more pressing things to worry about in Jersey City than a statue of Christopher Columbus. Okay? Worry about that the south side of Jersey City is still a dump. Worry about that the south side of Jersey City, even though it's being developed, you couldn't give away a house to me. You could give me a house on a silver platter and say, hey, Fernando, here, go live down Communipaw Avenue, or go live, along Bergen Avenue or Martin Luther King Drive. Are you crazy? I wouldn't live there if you paid me. Worry about those things. Those are the things that should be consuming Jersey City residents, not the statue of Christopher Columbus. If that's still triggering you, folks, I'm telling you, you need a hobby or you need something better to do. And now to another local story that affects so many North Bergen residents. And once again, shout out to John Hines with the Hudson County View for his report on this very significant story. Now, a man who killed a North Bergen woman in Jersey City last year in a crash has indeed pled guilty, according to authorities. Now, a Union City man who killed a North Bergen woman in Jersey City back in May of last year has pleaded guilty to two of the more serious charges issued in connection to the incident. Now, this past week, Jonathan Ortiz Guanaga, age 27, out of Union City, pled guilty to one count of second-degree death by auto and one count of fourth-degree assault by auto related to the fatal crash that occurred on May 15th, 2019 on Patterson Plank Road in Jersey City. Now, this was a statement released by Hudson County Prosecutor Esther Suarez. Now, the plea was heard before Hudson County Superior Court Judge Patrick Array, and members of the victim's family were present in the courtroom during the plea. Now, the state is recommending a sentence of 8 years in a New Jersey state prison, subject to the No Early Release Act, on the death by auto charge to run consecutive to a flat 12 months in New Jersey state prison on the assault by auto charge. Now, unfortunately, on June 27, 2019, at approximately 9:35 a.m., Ortiz Guanaga was arrested without incident by members of the Hudson County Regional Collision Investigation Unit and was charged with death by auto and assault by auto. Now, he was also charged with violations of Title 39, or traffic violations that include speeding, driving while intoxicated, failure to maintain a marked traffic lane, and reckless driving. Now, Ortiz-Guanaga was subsequently indicted with an upgraded charge of aggravated manslaughter, a first-degree crime which will be dismissed as a result of his plea at the time of sentencing. Now, Suarez credited the Hudson County Regional Collision Investigation Unit with the investigation and the arrest by the Jersey City Police Department for assisting with the investigation. Now, again, what was really, really tragic, folks, again, on the morning of Sunday, May the 5th, 2019, at approximately 7:15 a.m., Jersey City police officers were dispatched to Patterson Plank Road in the Jersey City Heights, just south of the Congress Street intersection, right by the light rail station, if you're familiar with the area, on the report of a motor vehicle collision. Upon arriving, the responding officers discovered two vehicles were involved in the collision. The first vehicle was a 2008 Ford Edge, operated by Riano, containing a 30-year-old male passenger. The second was a 2015 Charger, operated by Ortiz-Guanaga. Now, all three individuals were transported by emergency medical services to the Jersey Medical Center. Riano was pronounced dead approximately at 3:15 p.m. Her passenger was treated for non-life-threatening injuries, while Ortiz-Guanaga was treated for injuries related to severe leg trauma. Now, sentencing in this case has been scheduled for October the 29th before Judge Uribe. Now, the state is being represented by Assistant Prosecutor Leo Hernandez and Assistant Prosecutor Luisa Flores of the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office. A quick side note here. I had the pleasure of going to high school with Leo Hernandez and also going to Rutgers University in New Brunswick with Leo. He's a fabulous attorney, and certainly he's been a very admirable prosecutor. Now, of course, I'm sure his hands are limited when it comes to sentencing, because when we talk about what a tragic story this was and how the death of this young lady in North Bergen resonated throughout the community, I would argue that the sentencing should be harsher. Now, again, as I said right now, prosecutors Hernandez and Flores collectively, I'm sure, are limited by what they can recommend to the judge. But I'm sure that many of us agree that this individual deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. He took an innocent life away by being irresponsible on a Sunday morning. Now, again, I'm hoping perhaps that maybe through this segment or other people reaching out to the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office, that perhaps a stiffer sentencing could be imposed on this case. Again, as I just mentioned, prosecutors Hernandez and Flores alike, I'm sure only have so much discretion when it comes to the state criminal statute and what's available to them. But you know what? If they could recommend something harsher, hey, I'd be all for it, folks, because we need to send a message about this sort of irresponsible behavior that continues to permeate, not just in Hudson County, but throughout New Jersey and the rest of the country. So again, my condolences and prayers go out to the Riano family, because quite honestly, it was a tragedy last year to read this and what an impact she made on this community. But we'll keep you posted about what's coming up during sentencing. But again, I feel bad for prosecutors Hernandez and Flores, because I'm sure they want a sentence that's much more harsher and much more punitive. But again, their hands are tied under the current New Jersey criminal code. And now to West New York, my hometown, for a story that quite frankly resonates with anyone who's ever worked in local government. Again, a shout out to John Hines once again for his excellent reporting on this story. Now, apparently ex-Felix Roque allies, which include Stephen Rodas, as well as Silvio Acosta and Ruben Vargas, are suing the Township of West New York for political retaliation. Now, allies of former West New York Mayor Felix Roque, which include, again, the aforementioned Stephen Rodas, Silvio Acosta, and Ruben Vargas, are suing Mayor Gabriel Rodriguez and the town of West New York for political retaliation after being let go or demoted from their jobs last year. Now, the 12-page, 3-count lawsuit, which was filed in Hudson County Superior Court in Jersey City on September 1st, alleges the following: that 5 former municipal employees had their civil rights violations due to protected political speech, constructive discharge, and breach of implied contract. Now, in the case of Rodas, a former trustee of the Board of Education, and suing for losing his post as assistant CFO at the Parking Authority, says that while the West New York Parking Authority was dissolved, he was not terminated for, quote, cause which violated his contract. Now, throughout last year's campaign leading up to the May municipal elections in 2019, the New Beginnings ticket in West New York, headed by Gabriel Rodriguez, say they would get to dissolving the Parking Authority, and that would save the Township of West New York an approximately $429,000 per year. Now, the Board of Commissioners approved the dissolution about a year ago and has been since replaced by Parking Services Utility. Now, in the case of Acosta, he was terminated on May 30th of last year, 9 days after his successor, Board of Education trustee Joey Rodriguez, the husband of freeholder Caridad Rodriguez out of the 7th District in North Hudson, was selected as the head of the West New York Department of Public Works. However, the team indicated that at the time he was being let go since he never acquired the proper certifications from the state, as reported last year via the Hudson County View. Nevertheless, though, he claims in the suit that he, quote, he lost a large amount of sick days, vacation days, and or personal days that he was entitled to. As for Ruben Vargas, the town commissioner, between mid-2011 through January 2015, he was promoted to field operations manager at the Western New York Parking Authority in 2017, according to the lawsuit. While he was terminated in November of last year, he remains employed at the West New York Housing Authority despite pleading guilty to equity skimming back in May of 2016. Now, the other two plaintiffs in the lawsuit, which include Mexi Belletti and Christian Pineda, also work for the DPW and allege that Supervisor Angel Alfonso told them, quote, it's not going to be good for you the day after Roque and his team lost the election. They were subsequently demoted, and Pineda claims he was forced to resign in February of this year. Alfonso was also a staunch supporter of Rodriguez last year and is part of a separate retaliation filing against Roque in federal court. Well, folks, listen, it's quite tragic what's happened here in the township of West New York, but it shouldn't surprise anyone because this is what tends to happen in local politics. I'm not saying it's correct, I'm not saying it's proper, I'm not saying it's right, but this is what happens when a new regime takes in, and they take power subsequently. And that what seems to be happening again in West New York. But, again, we'll go with the presumption of innocence, we'll let the laws of the land prevail, and we'll see what happens in the town of West New York. But this sort of action, folks, isn't too uncommon, as we've seen not just in Hudson County, but throughout all 21 counties, which include hundreds of municipalities and municipal workers that at some point in time are going to take exception with a new regime because they were part of the old regime. We'll keep you posted here in the weeks and months ahead as to what happens with this lawsuit. But like anything else, it doesn't seem to ever, fluctuate or at least benefit those that are filing, because at the end of the day, the city administration seems to get the win in court when all is said and done. And that's our show for this week. To check out all the excellent programming brought to you by the Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air, please go to their websites at www.hmgtvshows.com, www.livestream.com/HMGTV, and also www.njonair.com. Don't forget to like the Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air on Facebook, and follow them both on Instagram and Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume next week with our regular podcast of Talking the Hudson, which of course will provide audio clips here on the show in the coming weeks and months ahead. You can also check out recent episodes by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talking the Hudson. You can listen to it from any PC, Mac, smartphone, or tablet. And coming up, folks, in the next few weeks, we'll be talking about breast cancer awareness as the month of October is right around the corner. We'll have some very interesting segments about early detection, about the resources available to everyone in Hudson County for anyone that's afflicted with breast cancer, and what you can do to help a family, friend, or loved one during a very difficult time. We'll share that and much, much more in the weeks and months ahead. And never forget, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it's always talking politics right here with the Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air. I'm Fernando Uribe. Thank you so much for watching.
Don't forget to catch Fernando's podcast at blogtalkradio.com/talkonthehudson. New episodes available every Wednesday night at 9 p.m.